Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Camas Valley History Library Talk. This is Women's History Month, and this is the third talk that we've given to celebrate that. In previous years, we've talked about specific strong women of Camas Valley. Many chose to uproot their lives and move to a new place, not knowing what lay in wait, either on the journey or at the unknown destination. They were often young, elderly, sick, or pregnant. And look how many there are. Some were traveling alone, perhaps not even speaking English. Others were born in or came to the valley after it was settled. All contributed to its growth. There are so many stories that we could go on in this way, talking about individual women for years. But this year we've decided to mix it up a little bit. We're going to look at what the women of Camas Valley did. We're calling this talk Women and Their Work. The dictionary defines work as mental or physical effort done in order to achieve a purpose or result, tasks that need to be done. When we planned this talk, we intended to cover everything that the women settlers would have done in order to survive and thrive in Camas Valley. But it quickly became obvious that that would take several hours. So today we're going to look at the expectations society put on our women settlers and what some of them left behind to come here. We'll talk about conditions once here, and finally we'll look at one specific profession and one specific family and how women's work changed for them. Let's start with some history. In the pre-industrial West, work was agricultural and, I still can't say this right, artisanal. Thank you. The whole family worked side by side to survive, and the work done by women and girls was equally as important as that of their menfolk. Women cared for pigs and fowl, spun and wove fabric for clothing, and produced trade goods such as ale, dairy produce, and baskets. During busy seasons, they would help with stacking hay or slaughtering animals. Any surplus the family produced was traded for what they couldn't make, such as medicine, shoes, or metal. The Industrial Revolution fundamentally changed society. Rather than selling goods their family had produced by hand, more and more men left the home to sell their labour for wages. Many working class women did also labour in factories, and we'll come to that. But in general, it was expected that women should stay at home and perform domestic work. This led to what modern historians have called the ideology of separate spheres. The idea that women should inhabit a separate domestic sphere has been a theme in Western thought for centuries, millennia, actually. In his work, Politics, ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle described two separate spheres in society: the family, oikos, and the public, polis. This idea was continued by Enlightenment thinkers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who argued that women were dependent on men and, due to their reproductive capacity, ill-suited for life outside the domestic realm. In Emile, or On Education, he wrote, "Women's entire education should be planned in relation to men, to raise them as children, to care for them as adults, correct and console them, make their lives sweet and pleasant." Yeah. Here, the frontispiece of Emile, the wife tends to her smaller children while her sons study behind her. For 19th century viewers, this painting, called The Sinews of Old England, would have been immediately understandable as an allegory of separate spheres. For us modern folks, here's an explanation. The handsome, strong husband is gazing outwards, pickaxe in hand, ready to go out to earn the wages that will feed the family. The pretty, doting wife stands on the threshold of the home, the domain in which she belongs, the symbols of her domesticity on display. Clean dishes on the dresser, flowers and climbing plants around the door, and her nicely dressed daughter playing at one of the tasks she is learning at her mother's knee. Sadly, This was not a reality, but an aspirational idyll created by the upper classes. Working class families in the 19th century could not live out the doctrine of separate spheres because they couldn't survive on a single male wage. The Sinews of Old England doesn't depict a factory worker parting from his wife to go to work, because she would probably have, in fact, have been leaving with him to go to the cotton mill or the coal mine. This painting, The Dinner Hour Wigan, is closer to the truth, showing women halfway through their shift at a cotton mill. But it fell flat when it was exhibited in 1874. It was too grim, too industrial. One reviewer wrote, "We think it a pity Mr. Crowe wasted his time on such unattractive materials." Interestingly, modern critics consider this scene rather unrealistic. The women are clean and well-nourished, and the sky is relatively smokeless. So let's get real. The Industrial Revolution began in the late 1700s when British inventors created new processes and machinery, which took production away from the household and into factories. The first industry to be revolutionized was textile production. Between 1730 and 1850, hundreds of textile mills were established in Britain, mostly in Lancashire and southwest Scotland. By the 1840s, there were 412 cotton factories in Lancashire. Of the 116,300 workers in these factories, more than half were women or girls. The work was brutal. Working hours were up to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. The noise of the machinery caused hearing loss, and cotton particles filled the air, leading to ailments including mouth cancer and lung disease. Small wonder then that many were drawn away from these dark satanic mills to the promised Zion of Utah. And thank you, Deb, for the demon. One such woman was Alice Meller. She was born in Shaw, Lancashire, England in 1815. She married John Wolstenholme in Oldham in 1836, but he died in 1843, leaving Alice with 4 small children, no home or means of support. Within the year, both she and her oldest son, 7-year-old James, were working in the Oldham cotton mills. Being small, James might well have been charged with cleaning undermoving machinery, one of the most dangerous jobs within the mill. In that same year, the Lower House Mill, where Alice and James worked, collapsed, killing 20 workers. The Illustrated London News, from which this picture comes, reported it as the single biggest loss of life in Oldham at the time. Alice was baptised into the LDS Church in 1848, and in 1849 she married George Rhodes, a blacksmith and an elder in the Lancashire Church. Anxious to get to America, Alice, George, and the younger children sailed on the Margaret. On arrival in St. Louis, George was forced to travel in search of work, and he died of sunstroke not long after their arrival. Soon after, Alice met and married Thomas Hill, who was also from Oldham. James had been left behind. He'd been accepted as a pupil in the Oldham Bluecoat School, which is one of approximately 60 schools founded across Britain to care for and educate poor children. Funds for the family's emigration being limited, James remained in England to continue his education. In 1851, aged 14, he sailed on the Olympus and crossed the plains in the Philip de la Mare Freight Company. Alice, Thomas, and their children followed to Utah in 1853, settling in Ogden. Sorry, too many places beginning with O. James and his brother, William, settled in Camas Valley. Here they are on the back row of the family portrait, and Alice is on the front row. There you go. And here she is in a photograph of James at his home in Marion. She died in 1894 and is buried in Ogden. Ooh. Moving north from Lancashire, we come to another family of Camas Valley settlers who laboured in textile mills, this time in Scotland. Elizabeth Donnelly was born in County Tyrone, Ireland in 1804. Her family moved to Carlisle on the English-Scottish borders, probably in search of work. And in 1823, she married Ralph Maxwell, a fellow Irishman. They had 8 children, 6 of whom survived to adulthood. Around 1825, the family moved to Scotland, and by 1844, they were living in New Lanark and working in the New Lanark textile mill. The New Lanark mill was unique amongst British cotton mills, thanks to its owners David Dale and Robert Owen. Owen was a philanthropist and utopian socialist who, contrary to contemporary thinking, believed that a business could treat its workers well and still be profitable. The town he built for his mill workers, including a nursery and Britain's first elementary school, became celebrated throughout Europe. It was visited by statesmen, reformers, and royalty. The mill is now one of 7 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Scotland. In the 1840s, the Maxwells heard missionaries of the LDS Church. They were baptized in 1844, but Ralph died in 1852. In 1854, their son John came to Utah, and in 1856, Elizabeth made preparation to join him. She was 52. Thanks to the Perpetual Emigration Fund, she and her 5 children traveled on the Enoch train, at that time the world's largest clipper ship. Also on board were Elizabeth McCausland and Ellen Russell, who were betrothed to her sons Arthur and John, respectively. From Boston, the family traveled by boxcar to Iowa, where they were assigned to the MacArthur Handcart Company, which numbered about 220 people. There were 44 handcarts, 2 wagons, 12 yoke of oxen, 5 beef cattle, 12 cows, and 12 tents. They were allotted 55 pounds of flour each, plus rice, sugar, dried apples, tea, and salt, to last them 60 days. Sadly, Elizabeth never reached Zion. She died in 1856 with her daughter Catherine in attendance in Echo Canyon, where she's buried. Catherine Maxwell, Elizabeth and Ralph's oldest daughter, was born in Lanark in 1829. She sailed with the family in 1856 and stayed behind in Florence, Nebraska with her mother after she became sick. When they decided to continue the journey with another handcart company, there were no brothers to help carry the load. So Catherine walked the rest of the way to Utah, pushing the handcart which carried her mother. When her brother John invited her to ride with him into Salt Lake City rather than going on with the handcarts, she replied, "No, thank you. I've walked 1,000 miles to get here and I'll walk the rest of the way." I'm sorry, I can't do a Scottish accent. True. More bad news awaited her. Her fiancé, who had paid her way to Utah, had married someone else. When she refused to be his second wife, he said, "Well, you'll be somebody else's second wife." Sources report her reply as, "Well, that may be so, but I won't be yours." She went to work for the Truman family, where she became a beloved family member known as Aunt Katie. She married Jacob Micah Truman in December 1856. Yes, as his second wife. Brigham Young himself promoted the match and officiated at the ceremony. When Jacob was sent to establish a community in Peoria in 1860, he chose to take Catherine with him. Their second child, Catherine Loretta, was born in Peoria in 1861. The Trumans didn't stay in Peoria. In 1862, they were sent to Utah's Dixie, St. George, where they stayed for 8 years despite the harshness of life there. Catherine's experience in the Lanark cotton mills proved useful, and she and her sister wife, Elizabeth, made their own clothes out of the cotton Jacob grew. Catherine died in Huntington in 1922. Back to the Maxwells. Elizabeth McCausland was born in 1832 in Lanark. She was the 3rd child of William McCausland and Jane Kennedy, and worked in the same cotton mills as the Maxwells. She sailed with the Maxwells on the Enoch train and married Arthur Maxwell on board. Their first child was born in Salt Lake City in 1857. Like Catherine and Jacob, they were called to settle in Peoa, where Arthur served as counselor to Bishop Abraham Marchant. She died in Peoa in 1911. We've covered Ellen Russell Maxwell in a previous talk, but here are the highlights. She was born in Dumbarton, Scotland in 1832, the only child of Joseph Russell and Jeanette Fraser. Ellen met her future husband, John Maxwell, in the New Lanark cotton mills and emigrated on the Enoch train in 1856 with the rest of the Maxwell family. They were married in 1856. In 1860, Ellen and John were also sent with the first families to settle Peoa, where John served as a settlement's doctor and Ellen acted as his nurse. They lived in Peoa for almost 30 years before being sent to settle first Cowley in the Bighorn Basin and then Tabiona in the Uinta Basin. She died there in 1922 and is buried in Peoa. Isabella Bella McGavin was born in Glasgow in 1837. She was baptized into the LDS Church in 1851. All the McGavin family joined the church except for her father, who felt it was a disgrace to even listen to a Mormon. According to her family history, Bella actually chose to work in the Scottish textile mills, gaining permission from her schoolmaster to work at the mill after she'd completed her lessons each day at school. And apparently that choice served her well, since she was apparently recruited by a man called Holman, who was searching for about 20 weavers from the best of the mills in Scotland to go to Holyoke in Massachusetts. After meeting Bella, Mr. Holman said he would take the whole crew, Bella's mother Janet and 8 of her 9 siblings. They had 3 days to prepare to sail. While we've not been able to identify Mr. Holman, research suggests that he was recruiting for the town of Holyoke, one of the earliest planned cities in America. The city was built around 1848 to harness the power of Hadley Falls as captured by the new Holyoke Dam. As it turned out, the cotton mill didn't last, being deprived of raw materials by the Civil War. But Holyoke produced 80% of all the writing paper in the US in the 19th century and is still known as Paper City. Bella wrote to her father, "The night we landed in Holyoke, we found a friend in the gentleman that brought us away. That is Mr. Holman. He's furnished us with a fine house with 10 rooms and a kitchen with every convenience." For comparison, in Scotland at that time, a working class home would probably have been a single room for the whole family in a tenement block, which is a 4 to 6 story row house, which would have housed up to 10 families. Bella continued, "We all like it well, and we never felt happier at our work. We're all working under the best of masters, and we have about the best of pay there is. Agnes and Jane and I and Sarah and Mary all work alongside one another, and little Mary is making as much pay as any of us." You're going to have to excuse me now because I fluffed this twice. "We never lift," that means earn, "less nor 24 shillings a week. Little Robert, who was 7 or 8 at the time, is working and also has 24 shillings a week. The typical wage for a mill worker in Scotland at that time was 11 to 14 shillings a week. Her mother, Janet, took in boarders, and even the small children thrived. Bella wrote, "Little James is growing a fine stout boy, and little Jessie is growing very tall. They are both at school and doing well." The family stayed in Massachusetts until they had saved enough money to take them to Utah. Bella traveled in the Abraham Wright Company in 1849, along with the 59, along with the Walker family, who would go on to settle Peoa. As they got near Salt Lake, people came out to meet them bringing provisions. One family story tells that among these was a young man. It's also said that he was a childhood friend from Scotland who kept looking at Bella. She was walking barefoot to save her shoes and was so embarrassed that she kept trying to pull her long skirt over her bare feet. This was Ralph Maxwell, the youngest Maxwell son. They were married in 1860. And by 1862, they were living in Pioa along with Ralph's siblings. After Ralph's death in 1891, Bella sold the family's farm to their son James. She died in 1911 and is buried in Pioa. So now we have settlers in Camas, Marion, and Pioa, which brings us to the next part of the talk. What were conditions like for settlers on arrival in Utah? And I'm going to hand over to Joe to tell you more.
Okay. The pioneers arrived in Salt Lake City late in 1847 and immediately had to plant crops to meet their needs for the coming winter and provide seeds for the following spring. Mountain man Jim Bridger had warned them that nothing would ever grow in the Salt Lake Valley because the ground was so hard. And indeed, the ground did break some of the pioneers' plows. Luckily, some of the saints had learned irrigation techniques while serving missions in Southern Europe. The pioneers built a dam in nearby City Creek to successfully flood and soften the ground. As with all things in the new land of Deseret, settlement was organized by the church. A colonizing company was organized with a mission: raise crops or livestock, develop minerals or other resources. Settlements followed the Mormon fort, Mormon village model. Homes built close together for protection, social life, and communal projects such as irrigation and fencing. So how did it work? Firstly, the colonizing company was established, leaders were appointed, and equipment given. The company would then select a site, apportion and fence the land, set up irrigation, gather building materials, and erect a community meeting house, schoolhouse. And finally, the home building began. Camas Prairie, as it was called then, was in the second wave of settlement, having been scouted by Thomas Rhodes and granted to him in 1856. Pioa was scouted in 1857. Now let's talk about homes. Of course, at first there was nothing there to live in. Those lucky enough to have traveled to Utah by wagon got to live in the wagon box until a house could be built. The wagon was lifted from the running gears and set on the ground where it served as shelter. Ruth Pack and her sister wife, Nancy, for example, lived in their wagon box on arrival in Utah, whilst their husband, John Pack, built them a home. Those who came later, including the handcart pioneers, hoped to find a temporary home with earlier settlers. If all else failed, settlers fell back on the tents they had used on the trail until they could build a home. Building materials varied depending on availability. Here's an interesting insight into some of those materials. In 1857, the Packs were evacuated to Lehi and had to make homes for themselves. Ruth Pack's memories say Jane, Julia, and Ruth and their 16 children made for themselves a home among the willow. They wove willows through the ones that were standing and succeeded in making their living quarters quite comfortable. Luckily, they weren't there for long. In Camas Valley, the main material available was wood. Karen Marie Sorensen's biography has a description of her first home in what is now Marion after marrying Daniel Lewis in 1866. She lived in a slab shanty with a dirt floor for many years. 4 of her children were born there. Slab wood is the first outer slice of a tree, usually with the bark still attached, removed when squaring a log in a sawmill. The most common early home in Camas Valley was a log cabin, built of logs held together with wooden pegs. More logs were split into long, narrow pieces and driven into the cracks between the logs, which were then plastered over with clay, mud, or manure. Roofs were made of logs split in half with the flat side down, roofed with thatch or clay, and then topped with earth, and were far from watertight. Edmund Walker, first teacher in Peoa, recorded in his journal, "Snowing and raining all night, the rain was pouring in every house in Peoa. Oh, the wet in the house, not a dry pot in the house." As the years went on, the settlers began to clash with the Native Americans who already called Utah home. Echoes of Yesterday says, the Indians who were in the habit of using Camas Valley for their hunting ground and grazing land resented the invasion of the white settlers. It was not uncommon for renegade Indians to ride into Camas Valley and drive off the settlers' animals or demand food. As a result, the people were warned to protect themselves and their property and to put yourselves and your animals in such a condition that the Indians will be deprived of all opportunity of taking life and stealing stock. In Camas Valley, the settlers built two forts. First, Sage Bottom Fort in Peoa, and then the Rhodes Valley Fort. The Deseret News of June 23rd, 1869 reported, the Rhodes Valley Fort walls were 16 feet high. That's 6 feet higher than most fort walls. The logs formed the back walls of the cabins with gates in the east and west walls. By building their cabins into the walls of the fort, the settlers conserved building material as well as time. Central to every Latter-day Saint settlement was the school. While it also often served as meeting house and amusement hall, teaching was its most important purpose. In a revelation given in 1832-33, Joseph Smith stated, "Teach ye diligently, and my grace shall attend you, that you may be instructed more perfectly in theory, in principle, in doctrine." Closer to home, Lydia Marchant, second president of the Peoa Relief Society, said in 1886, "The office of teacher is an honorable one. It is an office you can do much good in if you have the spirit of your office. You have great responsibilities as teachers." Now, there are two women described as being the first teachers in Camas. My colleague, I'm going to pass it back to Kate, will tell you more.
Better. So we're going to start with Elizabeth Ann Betsy Van Driesen. She was born in Martinsburg, New York in 1837. The family were Methodists, and it's not clear when Betsy was baptized into the LDS Church. Family history says it is believed that Betsy was already of the Mormon faith and that her husband, John Samuel, became a Mormon on marrying her. John Samuel Delouche was Swiss and had fled Europe to avoid being conscripted into the French army in 1852. They were married in 1855. In 1865, they'd moved to Camas, where they had 4 children, the last born in 1871. Betsy taught in the schoolhouse at the center of the Rhodes Valley Fort. By 1874, they were living in St. George, where their last child, Erminie Ann, was born. Later, they moved to Animas City, now Durango, Colorado, where Betsy died in 1906. Teacher number 2. Adelia Grossbeck was born in Ohio in 1822, the oldest child of Garrett Lewis and Mercy Bosworth Grossbeck. Adelia is challenging to research. There's a lot of Lambert family lore and legend, which simply cannot be proved. What we are giving here is extracted from those legends with a bit of actual history when we could find it. It's not clear when she was baptized into the LDS faith. Family history claims that she went to school with Eliza R. Snow, wife of both Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. But since there was an 18-year age gap, we don't think that's likely. A more plausible explanation is that Adelia's mother Mercy was that school friend. So Adelia may have known Eliza, and therefore the early founders of the LDS Church through her. A precocious child, Adelia started school aged 3 and quickly learned to read and write. In the 1830s, the family moved to West Point Township in Iowa. In 1852, aged 20, Adelia became a teacher at Mrs. McGonagall's boarding school. Sorry, we couldn't resist. It's also not clear when she met John Lambert. Our favourite story tells that they first met as she was sitting under a willow tree reading the Book of Mormon. They were married 2 weeks later in 1846. All we can say is, since they were married in February, must have been a very warm day. Whatever the truth of their meeting and marriage, they crossed the plains in 1850 in the Benjamin Hawkins Company, other sources say the Lorenzo Young Company, and settled in Salt Lake City. Adelia bore John 10 children and supposedly also found him his second wife, Elena Hansina, also known as Sina Larson, the daughter of a neighbor. As a stonemason, John was among those involved in building the Salt Lake Temple and was offered a prodigious plot of land in Salt Lake City if he would remain to see it built. However, he preferred to take up the call to settle Rhodes Valley. Neither wife wanted to leave their comfortable adobe homes in Salt Lake City, but go they did. They lived in tents and the wagon box until John built them a house. Sina's granddaughter described it, a long log building with 2 rooms, one for each family. Between the 2 rooms was a roofed over porch where tools, harness, tubs, etc. were kept. We believe Adelia was the teacher who took over from Betsy DeLuche once the settlers of Camas moved out of the Rhodes Valley fort. At first, that school was a small log cabin, the one from the fort, with sawn log benches for students and a single table for the teacher. But in 1873, Camas postmaster G.B. Leonard wrote that, "We intend building a fine new schoolhouse next season." Adelia died in 1910 and is buried in the Camas Pioneer Cemetery. Having talked about some of the earliest teachers in the valley, we're now going to look at a family whose work in education has run through generations. Alice Melissa Smith was born in 1845 in New Canaan, Connecticut. In 1862, she and her family started for Utah by train. At St. Louis, the baggage car caught on fire and most of their luggage was destroyed. They crossed the plains in the Ansel Harmon Company, arriving in Salt Lake City in October. The family had no money, and Alice's younger sister, Ella, had mountain fever and whooping cough. They were taken in by the Merrill family, who put up a tent in their garden for them to live in until Ella recovered. In 1863, Alice's father died, and her mother married Ephraim Green. Soon after, he was sent to Hawaii, which was then called the Sandwich Islands. Alice's mother and younger sister, Ella, went with him. In January 1864, Alice married John McGuckin Mallin. He was the older brother of James Mallin, who had served as a guard in the Ansel Harmon Company as the Smiths crossed the plains. They had 11 children, 2 of whom died in infancy. In 1869, they moved to Rockport, where she became the town's teacher. She died in 1929, and is buried in Salt Lake Cemetery. Emma Smith Mallin was born in 1871 in Rockport, the 5th child of John McGuckin and Alice Smith Mallin. She studied at the Summit Stake Academy and became a teacher. We assume in Rockport, though we can't confirm that. She married John William Wilkinson Horton in 1893. Will worked for his uncle, William H. Stevens, for $1 a day until he earned enough to buy 40 acres of land on the Oakley-Piowa border. He fenced and cleared it, and by 1899, they were living in a new home in Oakley. Ella gave up teaching after her marriage, but always believed that a good education was of prime importance. Her daughter Grace wrote, "In our home, a school teacher was a much respected person. We were sent to school to learn, and we had better do just that." Maria Genevieve Hortin was born in Oakley in 1899, the fourth child of Ella and Will Hortin. She graduated from Brigham Young High Academy in 1817 and received a normal certificate, which was a teaching certificate, in 1918. She married Curtis Walton in 1921, and the couple lived in Oakley. Unlike her mother, she carried on teaching after marriage. In the 1930 census, her occupation is listed as teacher, and she's also listed among those who taught at Oakley School. Later, she also taught music from her home. She died in 1980 and is buried in Oakley. Eva Lorraine Hortin was born in Oakley in 1909, the 10th child of 11 of Ella and Will. Eva went to elementary school in Oakley, where she was taught by Cordelia Wilson, who would later marry her brother Joseph Carlyle. Eva's brother William Eugene also married a teacher, Pearl Franson. We discussed both Cordelia and Pearl in an earlier Strong Women talk. In case you missed that talk, you can watch a recording on our website. We'll put up a QR code at the end of this presentation, which will lead you there. Back to Eva. She attended South Summit High School and then BYU, where she graduated with a teaching certificate. She taught at Peoria Elementary School before moving to Lyman, Wyoming to teach there. In 1930, Eva eloped with Elmo Wolstenholme. They'd known each other since grade school and decided not to wait any longer. Elmo worked for his uncle at the Brooklawn Creamery, and the couple lived on the ranch. They had 11 children. Once the children were in school, Eva went back to work at South Summit School District, first in the hot lunch program, and later as a substitute teacher. According to her biography, her teachers knew that they were expected to be just as busy, if not more so, than on a day when their regular teacher was there. Eva died in 1999 and is buried in Oakley. Grace Ella Hortin was born in Oakley in 1902, the sixth child of Ella and Will Hortin. She attended BYU in Provo and LDS High School in Salt Lake City, and then took a 2-year teaching diploma at the University of Utah. She wrote, "Dad gave me a check and told me to go register for the teaching diploma. I wanted to register for interior decorating, or maybe business. Whatever, at age 20, she began teaching in Marion, then Oakley, and then later Bunkerville, Nevada. In 1928, she married William Bill McClure Harper Lemon, a widower with 5 children. They lived first in Marion, but eventually moved to Francis. They had 8 children. In later life, Grace realized that she had enjoyed teaching and went back to school to get a further qualification. She said, "I studied at night, sometimes until 4 in the morning, and I took correspondence courses so my husband and the children wouldn't be disturbed. Going back to school that way took me 10 years, but I was determined I was going to do it." Even after retiring from teaching in school, she taught remedial reading until having to stop for health reasons. She was also active in the PTA and won a seat on the Francis Town Council, although she said that it was maddening to serve because men on the council didn't take women seriously. Grace died in 1999 and is buried in Marion. Margaret Maggie Hortin Lemon was born in Francis in 1940, the 7th child of William Harper and Grace Ella Hortin Lemon. She graduated from South Summit High School and then went on to study social work at Utah State University. She married Charles John Ashman in 1959, thank you. And after his death in 1967, she married Duane Park, with whom she had 8 children. Like her mother, she recognized the need for further education, returning to school to get a 2nd degree in education and a master's degree in social work. She became a vocational rehabilitation counselor, helping people acquire new job skills and maintain financial independence. She died in 2024 and is buried in Marion. Ruth Horton Lemon was born in 1936 in Francis, the fifth child of William Harper and Grace Ella Horton Lemon. She graduated from South Summit High School in 1954 and went on to attend Utah State University, earning a master's degree in applied mathematics and statistics. She said, "I liked math, so it never occurred to me that it was unusual to be the only girl in class. First university class she taught was an all-male geometry class at USU. In 1960, Ruth went to work for Hercules Aerospace Corporation. But when she first went to meet with recruiters, a receptionist asked, "Who are you going to be secretary for?" In fact, Ruth later told an interviewer, becoming a woman in that field then wasn't a hardship. Everyone was new, and at the time, there wasn't a real hierarchy. I was recognized for what I did, not who I was. In 1966, Ruth married Philip Novak, an engineer at Hercules. She rose through the ranks, designing and manufacturing rocket motors for the boosters of space missiles, and becoming Vice President of Navy programs, which made her responsible for directing the Navy Fleet ballistic missile programs. As we've discussed, Ruth's mother, Grace, was a firm advocate for education, and Ruth followed in her footsteps, becoming a mentor for women in STEM. And for those of you that don't know the acronym, that's science, technology, engineering, and because I'm English, I'm going to say maths. She co-founded the Utah Math Science Network and workshops called Expanding Your Horizons, connecting schoolgirls with women professionals in STEM fields. She was a founding member of the Utah chapter of ARCS, Achievement Awards for College Scientists, and actively involved in the Utah Women's Forum and the Coalition for Utah's Future, which is now called Envision Utah. She also served on the USU College of Science Advisory Board. Ruth's many honors include an honorary doctorate of science and engineering from USU and an honorary doctorate of technology from Salt Lake Community College, a Women of Achievement Award from the Utah Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs, the Governor's Medal in Science and Technology, the YWCA Outstanding Achievement Award, and the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Women Tech Council. Sue Dintelman, 2022 to 23, ARCS Utah Chapter President, summed it up. Ruth is a rock star. Ruth said, "A teacher encouraged me to continue my math studies, and of course, so did my mother. My education has given me a good life, and I want to help girls realize that they can have good jobs too." And one more quote. "If girls just fall into an occupation, chances are it won't pay well. If you're going to work, why not have a career and be well paid for it?" Thank you for listening. And here is that QR code we promised. Thank you. Any questions? Cotton, the cotton fibers, you were breathing them in. And yeah, in the same way that you get, what's the one from breathing in coal dust?
Oh,
Yeah.
coal.
Yeah, coal dust or asbestos, it can cause, goes into, yeah. And there was something called brucellosis, which I didn't put in because I couldn't pronounce it. Yeah, which was throat problems. So
What was it called? Brucellosis?
brucellosis, I think. Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to work in the cotton mills in those days. It's pretty grim. Anything else?
They didn't know.
No, no.
Did everybody know Ruth Novak? Those that knew her, were you surprised with all of the feats that she achieved?
No, because I heard about it growing up.
It is quite
Yeah.
incredible for
Yeah.
any person to be able to achieve that in any time of year.
When she and Phil announced that they were going to get married, one of their co-workers said, well, Ruth, you know, you're gonna have to learn to cook. And she said, oh, I'm gonna feed him pie.
Good.
You know what Phil actually did? I mean, Kate,
Yeah, I just know that he worked there. I don't know what he did. She was his boss, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Developed the missile system that took men to the moon.
Yeah, yeah. I've been wanting to write about her for ever since I heard about her. Yeah, she's pretty amazing.
Part of their Yellowstone, met twice a year.
Ah,
Ruth and Phil and two other couples, they go to Yellowstone twice a year.
Wow. very cool.
Not very cheap.
Hmm. Right, well,
Well, that's any other questions.
I think we're done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming here.
The next one is going to be slightly less educational. We're thinking about doing sports. So if anybody knows anybody who did anything in the sporting field in the Valley, ever, come and tell us about it.
Did as well. He was very athletic in high school.
Ah,
And so
okay.
She should say, teach PE. She said, I don't want to teach PE, I want to be in math.
And we're glad she did. Yeah.
Documentary film, about he was an Olympic athlete from like southern Utah.
Uh-huh.
Trying to think of the name. I know it was by the Angel Studio,
Okay.
but it was quite excellent.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're talking probably 1930.
Oh, nice.
Right.
That's Angel.
Angel Studios. All right, look it up.
Yeah, he
Wow.
was a pole vaulter.
Oh,
I
somebody writing that down. I don't have a pen.
Well, thank you. I mean, obviously, if you think of anything, not necessarily tonight, but any other time,
yeah.
you know, we'd
You
love
can
to hear.
always write on our Facebook page or drop us an email. It's camusvalleyhistory@gmail.com. Sorry.
Louis Field. He's an athlete. And he was a world-renowned rodeo.
That's right. Yeah, he's on my list if we're
Yeah.
allowed to do rodeo.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
people,
that's an athlete, those are
far as-
athletic
yeah,
people.
absolutely. No, I mean, he's definitely on my list. But I mean, the Valley has had an awful lot of different sports through the years. And has been very good at some of them, and then, you know, as everything is cyclical. But it's amazing actually how many sports have been represented in the Valley. And it's not a large population when you think about it. Certainly until recently, it's been very small. So it's remarkable actually how many athletic sports the Valley or towns in the Valley of and the schools have done so well, especially with relative to state. And what we're interested in is actually the anecdotes, the stories, you know,
Yep.
the jokey
And
stories.
pictures.
And
Yes.
definitely in pictures.
Yes. Yes.
We'd like to make it entertaining if we
Yeah.
can, but it's you know, it's the World Cup in the United States and Mexico and Canada this year. So
In theory.
we should do something on
We will not be doing soccer.
much.
And I hate soccer.
Soccer, football. Well, thank you anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you.